There are moments in life when the light goes out. Not slowly, like a sunset, but suddenly, like a candle extinguished in a storm. Everything you built, everything that defined your purpose, shatters into shadow. You are left holding only the memory of warmth, wondering if you will ever feel it again, if you still matter in the darkness. This is a story about that darkness. It is a story about the devastating weight of failure and the quiet, difficult journey of healing. This is the story of Kyle, and it will show you that true strength is not found in holding on, but in the courage of letting go. In a quiet valley, nestled between mountains that touch the clouds, lived a man whose life was dedicated to light. In a village perched on the edge of a deep, misty valley, light was more than just a utility. It was a currency of hope, a map of safety, and the village's very soul. And the source of that soul was Kyle. Kyle was not just a craftsman, he was the lantern maker. His shop, tucked into the oldest street, was a place of hushed awe. From his hands came light that seemed warmer than a simple flame. He spun delicate cages of brass that dripped with colored glass, casting intricate, blossoming shadows on the cobblestones. His lanterns were the lifeblood of the community. They hung in every window, guided travelers through the fog, and illuminated the faces of families at their nightly meals. The villagers revered him. They spoke of his skill in whispers, as if he were a magician, and Kale believed them. His entire sense of self, the very architecture of his identity, was built from this reverence. His worth was not measured in coin, but in the flawlessness of his work. Every morning he would enter his workshop, and the world outside would dissolve. There was only the smell of hot metal, sharp solvents, and the cool, smooth surface of cut glass. This was his sanctuary, but it was also his prison. His motivation was a quiet, burning obsession to create a legacy so perfect it could never be forgotten. But this pursuit of perfection had a price. His discipline was a heavy armor. He trusted no one with his process. He had apprentices, but he never taught them his heart, only his technique. He was admired by all, but known by none. In the quiet hours before dawn, Kyle would inspect his finished work, his brow furrowed. He wasn't looking for beauty. He was hunting for the single devastating flaw. This relentless focus had given him strength, but it had hollowed him out, leaving a quiet, cold space inside. He was the village's master of light, but he lived in a constant private shadow, the fear that one day his hands would fail and the light would go out. And if the light went out, he would go out with it. For months, Kale had been consumed by a singular vision. He called it the Starlight Prism. It was a creation whispered about in the village taverns and dreamt of by the children. It was not to be made of brass, but of silver, not of simple glass, but of crystal, ground impossibly thin and angled with mathematical precision. The village myth, which Kale secretly fostered, was that it wouldn't just hold a flame. It would be designed to capture the natural light of the stars themselves, concentrating their distant cold fire into a single, breathtaking beam. It was an audacious, arrogant dream, and it was becoming his reality. His journey to create it was a grueling one. He neglected basic orders. His shop grew dusty, the floor littered with shards of failed attempts. He spent sleepless nights calculating angles, his hands raw from polishing the delicate crystal facets. He burned rare, fragrant oils, seeking the perfect, smokeless flame to sit at its heart. This struggle wasn't just craftsmanship, it was a sacrifice. He poured every particle of his discipline, his motivation, and his very essence into its construction. As the weeks turned into a final month, the village began to gather. They would stand outside his window, not daring to interrupt, watching his silhouette move against the light of his forge. They saw the prism take shape, gleaming even in the dim light of the workshop. Their collective awe was a tangible thing, a pressure that both fueled Kyle and trapped him. With every piece he set in place, his pride swelled. This lantern was the culmination of his entire life. It was the physical proof of his unparalleled strength, the tangible evidence of his purpose. He looked at the finished prism, sitting on its velvet cloth, and he did not see an object. He saw himself. He saw his legacy. He saw the validation he had chased his entire life, finally captured and held still in a cage of silver and crystal. He had, at last, created something flawless, and in its perfection, he finally, fleetingly, felt perfect too. He was Kyle, the man who had captured Starlight. The festival of first light was set for the following evening. The village was humming with a quiet, joyful energy. The air was crisp and still, holding its breath in anticipation. Inside his workshop, Kyle made his final reverent adjustments. The Starlight prism sat on its pedestal, a beacon of promise. He had lit the special flame within it, and the shop was transformed. It was no longer a room of wood and tools. It was a galaxy. Pinpricks of light, sharp as diamonds, danced on the walls. Beams of pure white light cut through the shadows, projecting patterns of impossible delicacy. Coquence, Kyle stood back, his heart so full of pride it ached. He had done it. He was immortal. That was when the first gust of wind hit the shop, rattling the windows in their frames. It began without warning. Not a gentle rain, but a sudden violent tearing of the sky. The stillness of the valley turned into a chaotic roar. The wind didn't just blow, it screamed, a high-pitched, furious sound that seemed personal. Kyle rushed to bar the windows, but the storm was too fast. It was a physical entity, an invading force of pure chaos. He heard a crack, not of thunder, but of the old wood in his roof. Rain and hail blasted through the window shutters, extinguishing the smaller lanterns. Then, the main support beam above his workbench, heavy with water and battered by the wind, groaned. Kyle looked up, his eyes wide with a sudden cold understanding. He lumbered forward, his hands outstretched, yelling, "No!" A sound, swallowed by the tempest. The beam snapped. It crashed down directly onto the pedestal. The sound was not a tinkling. It was a sickening final smash, followed by the sharp crystalline shatter that echoed even over the roar of the wind. The light went out. The storm raged for another hour, but Kyle did not move. When the winds finally subsided, there was only the sound of dripping water and his own hollow breathing. By the pale light of the moon, he saw it, the wreckage. The silver frame was twisted, bent into an ugly, unrecognizable shape, and the crystals, they were gone, reduced to a glittering carpet of dust and sharp, meaningless splinters. It was not broken, it was erased. The prism was gone, and Kale, the lantern maker, was gone with it. His purpose, his strength, his entire life's motivation, all of it, just broken glass in the dark. When the sun rose, it revealed a valley washed clean, but Kyle's world remained in shadow. The villagers emerged to find their streets littered with branches and broken tiles. Their first thoughts after securing their own homes were of Kyle, of the prism. They gathered in a silent crowd outside his ruined shop. The door was splintered, the roof half gone. They peered in, and they saw him. Kyle was sitting on the floor, surrounded by the debris. He was perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the glittering dust that covered the floorboards. His face was a mask of ash and rainwater. The village elder stepped forward, his voice soft. "Kyle? Kyle, are you hurt?" Kyle didn't look up. He didn't speak. He simply raised one hand, not in greeting, but in a command to be left alone. One by one, the villagers turned away, leaving him to his grief. But it was not grief that held Kyle. It was something harder. It was denial. He refused to accept the failure. In his mind, the storm was a mistake, an interruption, not an end. The prism was not gone. It was just scattered. He did not sweep the workshop. He began to collect. He spent days on his hands and knees, a ghost in his own life. He picked every shard of crystal from the mud and splinters. His hands, once so steady and precise, became raw and bloody. He would hold a tiny, sharp piece up to the meager light, his eyes narrowed, trying to remember where it belonged, as if he could somehow piece the starlight back together through sheer force of will. This became his new, terrible discipline. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. He was trapped in a loop, his mind replaying the sound of the crash, the echo of shattering glass. His workshop, once a beacon of purpose and motivation, became a tomb. The remaining lanterns grew dim, their wicks choked with dust. He was trying to rebuild the past, but all he was doing was cutting himself on its sharpest edges. The villagers would leave food by his door, but it would remain untouched. They stopped trying to talk to him. He was no longer Kyle, the craftsman. He was just the shadow in the ruined building, obsessively clutching the fragments of his own identity, refusing the very idea of healing, because healing would mean accepting that his masterpiece, and the man he was gone forever. He was paralyzed, unable and unwilling to begin the journey of letting go. One afternoon, a week into his waking nightmare, a new sound cut through the silence. It wasn't the whisper of the wind or the skittering of a loose shard. It was a slow, rhythmic tap, tap, tap on the broken stone floor. Kyle froze, his hand hovering over a sliver of crystal. He looked up from the floor, his eyes struggling to focus. Standing in the doorway, her figure silhouetted against the weak light, was Alara. She was the oldest woman in the village, a weaver whose hands were as calloused and scarred as his own. Alara was also, and had been for 60 years, completely blind. Her world was one of thread, texture, and temperature. She navigated the wreckage of his shop not with fear, but with a slow, careful curiosity, her cane finding the safe places to step. Kyle watched, speechless. He had not had a visitor in days. Alara didn't offer condolences. She couldn't see the devastation. She couldn't see the twisted silver, the carpet of broken glass, or the raw, bleeding cuts on Kale's hands. She didn't gasp in horror at his failure. She simply stood in the center of the room, her head tilted, and felt the space. After a long silence, she pulled her thin shawl tighter. "It is cold in here, Kyle," she said. Her voice was like dry leaves, soft but certain. Kyle said nothing, still clutching the shard. "Your shop, it was always the warmest place in the village," she continued, turning her sightless eyes toward where he sat. "Even in winter, I used to walk by and I could feel the light coming through the walls. It was like a hearth for the whole street." She took another step, her cane tapping near the wreckage of the pedestal. "The light you made, it wasn't just for seeing." Kyle's breathing hitched. It was the first human voice that had truly registered in his mind. Alara paused, her face etched with a genuine, simple confusion. She reached out a hand as if to feel the air. "So, I must ask you," she said, her voice dropping to a quiet, piercing question. "Did you make those beautiful things so people could look at them, or so people could feel them?" The question hung in the dead, cold air. It bypassed his pride. It ignored his masterpiece. It went straight to the heart of his purpose. Kyle looked down at the useless, sharp piece of glass in his palm, and for the first time, he truly saw it. Alara's question was a key, turning in a lock that had rusted shut. Did you make them to be looked at, or to be felt? He had no answer for her. He had only ever cared about how his work was seen. After she left, her steady tapping fading down the street, Kyle remained on the floor. But something had broken free. The ghost of his failure, the obsessive echo of the crash, suddenly went quiet. He looked at his bloody hands, not with the manic focus of a restorer, but with the dawning, painful clarity of an addict seeing his own ruin. He saw the shards of the prism for what they were, not a sleeping masterpiece, but a grave. Just cold, dead glass. The transformation began not with a bang, but with a breath. He let out a long, shuddering sigh that seemed to carry weeks of tension with it. It was the sound of surrender. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself to his feet. He walked to the back of his shop, past the ruin, and found his old, worn broom. He started at the doorway and swept. It was a ritual of letting go. With every push of the broom, he was clearing more than just debris. He was sweeping away the pride. He was sweeping away the crippling weight of perfection. The sharp, glittering sound of the shards skittering across the floor was no longer an echo of his failure. It was the sound of his healing. He swept it all into a pile, the silver, the crystal, the dust, the last 2 months of his life. And he put it into a bucket, and for the first time, he turned his back on it. His shop was empty, cold, dark. Kyle looked at his workbench. It was scarred by the fallen beam, but it was sturdy. He found an old tin can. He found a spare wick. He found a small bottle of simple, clean-burning oil. His hands, cut and stiff, moved slowly, clumsily. There was no artistry in it, no arrogance. He wasn't building a legacy. He was just trying to get warm. He lit the wick. A small, simple flame sputtered to life, orange and humble. It cast a weak, gentle circle of light on the battered wood. It wasn't starlight. It wasn't a masterpiece, but as Kale held his hands over it, feeling the modest warmth seep into his skin, a profound sense of peace settled over him. It was the first light he had felt in years. News of Kale's small act spread through the village with a quiet swiftness. The elder, seeing the humble light in Kale's window and the pile of debris outside his door, made a decision. The Festival of First Light had been postponed, but it was not canceled. He approached Kyle, not at his shop, but in the village square, where Kyle was sitting, watching the clouds. The elder didn't ask Kyle to rebuild his masterpiece. He simply said, "The people are cold, and the nights are still dark. We need your light, Kale. Not your perfection, just your light." Kyle looked at the elder, and for the first time, he saw not a patron or a critic, but just a man. He nodded. He returned to his workshop, but he did not go to his forge. Instead, he took his remaining stock of simple tins, clear glass jars, and basic wicks, and he carried them out into the square. He set up his scarred workbench under the open sky. The villagers gathered, curious. He didn't begin a grand construction. He simply lit his one small tin can lamp. Then he turned to a young girl watching him, her eyes wide. "Light is not for capturing," he said, his voice rough but kind. "It is for sharing." He handed her a tin and a wick. He showed her how to pour the oil. He showed her how to light it. She held up her own small, flickering flame, her face illuminated with a sudden, beautiful joy. This was the beginning of his true rebirth. He spent the entire day not as a master, but as a teacher. He showed the children how to make simple jar lanterns. He showed the adults how to repair their old, broken ones. His discipline was still there, but it was softer. It was the discipline of patience, of humility. That evening, the festival began. There was no grand unveiling. There was no single blinding masterpiece. Instead, one by one, the villagers came. The young girl brought her tin lamp. Her father brought his repaired storm lantern. Alara, the blind weaver, brought a simple candle, cupped in her hands, feeling its warmth. Soon, the square was filled not with starlight, but with hundreds of small, imperfect, flickering flames. They called it the Festival of Embers. Kyle stood in the middle of it all, his face streaked with soot and oil. He held no lantern of his own. He was just watching the light he had given away. He saw the warmth on the faces of the families. He saw the children dancing, their simple lanterns casting playful, joyful shadows. He felt a connection to his community he had never felt when they were admiring him from afar. His purpose had not been shattered, it had been transformed. He finally understood. His journey was never about the strength to create a perfect light. It was about the courage to be the light in the darkness, no matter how small. He was no longer the master. He was just Kyle, a man holding a match, and for the first time in his life, he felt whole. We all have a starlight prism, that one thing, a career, a relationship, a dream, that we pour our entire identity into. We tell ourselves, "This is who I am." And then, the storm comes. It always comes. And in a moment, the thing that held your world together shatters. You are left in the wreckage, a ghost in your own workshop, holding the sharp, broken pieces of your own failure. You, like Kyle, are lost in the cold. But Kyle's journey is a map. It leaves us with a hidden light of hope, and it teaches us the deepest truths about our own transformation. First, your worth is not your work. Your value is not your victory. The failure of your creation is not the failure of you. You are the hand that builds, not the thing that is built. Second, the obsession with rebuilding the past is a prison. True healing begins only in the moment of surrender, the painful, courageous act of letting go of what is broken. Third, we mistake perfection for strength. True strength is not the ability to never fall. It is the humility to sit in the rubble and the quiet discipline to find the will to sweep it away. Fourth, your purpose is not a single blinding masterpiece. Your purpose is the simple daily act of bringing light, however small, to the cold. It is found not in being admired, but in being present. Fifth, your rebirth will not be a monument. It will be a single small flame. It will be a quiet, humble act of service, first to yourself and then to others. And finally, the light you give away is the only light you truly keep. Kyle's story is over, but yours is being written. You may be in the dark right now. You may be surrounded by the shards of what used to be. Your journey to peace begins now. Find your own small flame, feel its warmth, and then have the courage to share it. If this story helped you find a piece of your own hidden light, please share it with someone who may be sitting in the dark.